Maureen Lemassney, and I want to welcome you to the meeting of the Police Reform Work Group. I welcome not only our members, but also the public who are watching our proceedings. If you're joining us for the first time, our mission is to provide our County Executive, Angela Alsobrooks, with substantive recommendations that will establish fair practices across the board and restore public trust in law enforcement. We've established 5 subcommittees that are beginning to meet and work. Our agenda tonight consists of a presentation from the Prince George's County Police, an overview, data examination, and we have our Chief of Police here with us tonight. So let me turn this over to Delegate Washington. Delegate, anything?
No, thank you, Judge. We have our great chief here, Chief Hector Velez here, the interim chief of the Prince George's County Police Department, and he'll be conducting a presentation in front of us today. Can we put up his presentation, and then once it's put up, Chief, it's all you for the next 25 minutes.
Okay. First, I want to thank everyone for allowing us to have the opportunity to come before the task force to go over this information. You have a lengthy PowerPoint presentation, but we're going to be jumping to, I believe it's slide 43, which is where the statistical data starts. I know there were questions regarding data collection and reporting. And so I have Mr. Alan Lee. He is our Chief Information Officer with our IT department. He is going to go into the process by which we collect the data, how the data is sorted, and the various nuances with the systems that we use, and then our partners that we work with, and how that information is collected, reported.
So, Chief, I'm not sure. That's not on desktop. Someone else is sharing the data. We don't know who.
Yeah, they
have it.
Yeah, they have it.
I see. Got it.
Yeah. They said they have it.
So that's not.
That's not us.
Is Charmaine?
No, she's not there.
This is Ryan Middleton. I was asked to
Okay, perfect.
post the post the presentation on my computer. So I just need to know.
Okay.
Tell me which slide to be on then.
To the slide that says statistical data.
Is that forward or backward?
Go backwards. Try slide 13. Yes, keep going backwards. And you'll see, actually go forward now, you'll see a cover sheet. Right there. Perfect. Okay. All right, so at this point, Mr. Alan Lee is going to go over the statistical data. Again, how it's collected and how it's reported and things like that. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lee.
So good evening, everyone. Pleasure getting together with you this evening. The chief I spoke earlier, there were a lot of questions, as I understand, in regards to data regarding traffic stops, crime, self-officer initiated type things like that. So we tried to put together a comprehensive view of what we can do on a daily basis, how we manage data within the police department, and then we can follow up with any more details you got at a later date, things like that. So, Mr. Middleton, if you would just advance the next slide, please. So we talked often, and I started off with talking about calls for service. And the reason for that is almost everything the police department does begins with some type of a call for service. And that call for service can be coming from the 911 communication center because someone calls in and needs police assistance, or it could be an officer initiated activity. They make a traffic stop or they get flagged down by someone on the side of the road or they see something. But but all of it results in a calls for service. Those calls for service are all entered by the communications dispatch center into a computer aided dispatch program that we have. Motorola is the vendor. We've had that program in place since 2016, so this is our 4th year. And it's a singular CAD system used by all law enforcement agencies throughout Prince George's County. So not just the county police, but all municipalities. And like I said, it's used by everyone with the exception of the Maryland State Police. They have their own system they use, but it's a shared system that lets us all communicate back and forth between one another. Within that CAD, there are literally hundreds of call types. Quite often we find the initial classification or how an officer gets dispatched to a call may not be what they find when they arrive on the scene. It could go into something as generic as an unknown trouble or a loud noise. And when they get there, they didn't find out it's a domestic. It may go in as a robbery. They get there and find out it's a burglary. So it can be changes between the initial call type and what we find when we go on the scene. And that'll make more sense why I'm saying this in a few minutes. We'll get to some of these portions. Next slide, please. So right here, I just grabbed a quick snapshot of a call. And literally when I say there's hundreds, there are probably 250 different types of calls for service. What I did here was a quick survey we pulled this morning. They're listed alphabetically, so there's no rhyme or reason for them other than alphabetically. It goes through the numbers, the A's, the B's, the C's, and the D's. But for each one of these, you'll see what the CAD call type is. And then the number next to it represents the numbers of those call types that we've handled so far this year. That data was current as of yesterday. So it gives you an idea that so far this year, we've had 2,700 and some odd calls where there's been a 911 call came in, I just got disconnected. We've had a little over 8,000 accidents and as few as 2 barricades. So like I said, this data is available at any given time for us and for all the agencies, but it's just to give you an idea of where they go. We can pull out additional data if you want it later based on every call type for multiple years, going back to the beginning. But that list is so extensive and so large, it just wouldn't fit on a single PowerPoint slide. It gives you an idea of where it's at. Next slide. So then we began looking at what do we do for those calls for service. So there were some questions about how busy we are in various areas, how much police work goes into the various sectors, the various districts. So what I did here was we went back and looked at for the last 5 years. So we went back to 2016. And it includes the data from 2016 through 17, 18, 19, full calendar years. And then this year from January 1st through August 31st, so through 2 days ago. The sectors are broken down within the individual districts. So I don't know if you're familiar with it, but or A and B sectors are District 1, C is District 6, D and E are District 2, F is District 5, G is District 3, H is District 8, J, K, District 4, and W is District 7. But it gives you the total numbers to see where things exist within those sectors. So you will see some of our more busy sectors or things like Adam Baker, George, John and King, and some of the slower ones or less populous ones are Frank, William, things of that nature. But we track this data daily on a daily basis. And it's things that we use when we talk about resource deployment and how we're going to respond to areas and staffing and things of that nature. Next slide. There was a question in regards to traffic stops. So within traffic stops, again, same time frames, 4 full years and this partial year. Shows the number of traffic stops we capture every year. You'll see they generally are around 100,000, give or take. So far this year is only 20,000, substantial decrease, and the majority of that, a lot of it's tied to COVID. Signal 26 in effect, and a lot of less traffic stops that have been occurring in regards to it. Next slide. So now from traffic, we'll talk about crime and things of that nature. So when we talk about crime data, it can be tracked using a variety of methods. I talk about 3 things here. And just to give you a little background in regards to things, the FBI has a thing called UCR, the Uniform Crime Reporting Methodology, with some standards put in effect in the late 1970s. And the idea was it was to standardize crime collection across the country. Various states, various jurisdictions have got different codes, different names for crimes, different statutory requirements. So this was a way of making everything uniform and get an apple to apple versus apple to orange comparison. So no matter how we track crime, no matter what we call it within the state, we're required to classify things along these FBI guidelines. And it's what we report to the state of Maryland, as well as to the FBI on a monthly basis. In conjunction with that, we can also track things based upon Maryland annotated code. So that's useful if we're looking for exact charging language. We're trying to figure out how many people violate a specific law within Maryland. We would use that. And then internally, I talk about, we use sort of a hybrid method of the two. The UCR guidelines are probably the most accurate, but there's a timing aspect because to reclassify it to match everything, those UCR guidelines take some time. If we want to be able to release or to track crime on a daily basis in regards to what happened in the previous 24 hours, we had to come up with another method of doing that. So we do that based upon a call clearance code system we put in effect, and I'm going to touch a little bit more on that one. Next slide. So I want to talk about those clearance codes. Clearance codes are assigned by the responding officer on the scene. A clearance code's got 4 characters in it. The first character determines what action was taken by the officer. To give examples on the bottom of the screen, it's always an odd number, a 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. If it's a 1, it means an officer responded and no action there was nothing found, or the call got canceled before they got there, something of that nature. 3, the officer responded and handled the call, but it didn't require a report to be written. A 5 means they always wrote a report. 7, an arrest was made, and 9, an arrest warrant was served. That's the first character. The next 2 characters have to do with some signals I'm going to talk about in a moment. And what we did with it was we took the majority of our major crime types and we assigned a 2-digit code to each one of those. The final character is a special studies code. It's usually a letter, and it's how we can designate things like if a weapon was involved. In cases of a burglary, if we want to separate out whether a burglary occurred in a residence or commercial building. In cases of a theft, whether the theft was from a person or whether it was from a vehicle. So that's where the 4th character comes into play. And the next slide will explain a little bit more in detail. So next slide, please. So these are examples, again, of just a few of them that are there. So those middle 2 characters, you can see a homicide is a 64, rape 65, robberies an 84. And these various codes are used in that fashion. There are other ones that exist in regards to that list, but these are the majority, the major things we deal with on an everyday basis. Next slide. So now we talk about actually statistical data and how we capture things. So we sort of categorize crime into 2 areas, violent crime and property crime, the way and what we've combined together. So when we talk about violent crime, you just talk about it, it's going to include homicides, any type of forcible rapes, the 3 robbery categories of commercial, residential, and citizen robberies, as well as carjackings and assaults. When we talk about property crime, we're going to refer to it regarding burglaries. So whether that's a commercial establishment, a residential home, or something other like a school, a shed, other types of things, as well as all thefts and stolen vehicles. We track crime daily based on incidents handled by the officers, along with the municipalities where we handle follow-up investigative responsibility. So I'm going to give you some numbers here in just a moment. But when you see those, so what we're talking about is everything that we've handled and those smaller jurisdictions where we handle their investigations. It does not include data for the larger municipalities that have their own full function police departments. So things like the city of Laurel, the city of Greenbelt, Hyattsville City, Bowie City, their data is not included in this portion. Smaller areas like Forest Heights, Colmore Manor, those would be included in our numbers. And again, we can break all those down further if need be. Next slide. So this is an example, and this chart's a little hard to read in a PowerPoint portion, but I'm hopefully a little on your screen. It then goes back, what we looked at was the January 1st through the August 31st timeframe, because we wanted to do an even comparison for you. And we went back over the last 5 years and broke it down by those categories I just talked about. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the major crime categories, murder, rape, robbery, and then underneath that, you'll see the 3 subdivisions for robberies, carjackings, 2 categories for assaults, 3 for burglaries, 2 for thefts and the stolen vehicles. And it gives you basically the 9-month comparisons of where we've had things going for the last 5 years. Total wise, you'll see this year to date, there's 1,400 violent, 7,300 property, and we're sitting at 86 total year to date for right now. We've been seeing a steady decline, and you've probably seen pieces of that. We've seen declines for the last decade almost in most of our crime categories. We've seen a slight uptick this year, and we'll continue to monitor that again on a daily basis, even throughout the course of the day. Next slide. So Each day, before the staff comes in and the department sort of arrives, we put together what we refer to as a DCR, the daily crime report. And the daily crime report's done and emailed to the whole police department by 7:30 every morning. So this information is available for everyone, from a patrol officer on the street all the way through the chief level. They've got that. It comes directly with their email. And this is just a couple of sheets I'm going to show you out of it, but it's an actual book. That book can be anywhere from 20 pages to 30 or 40 pages long, depending upon what's been going on for the previous 24 hours. But in here, you'll see it's very similar to the chart I just showed you, meaning the left-hand side get the same crime categories. Slight differences is when you look at the columns, what we do is we do a 7-day running total. So they can see within the last week, and every day it just shifts one column to the right. We also show for last year the totals for the total calendar year, the full 12 months. And then we do this year versus last year, year-to-date comparisons. We give them the number differences, whether they're up or down, in regards to the percentages, whether the percentages are up or down. A couple of color codings you'll see on here. We do it just for ease within the department. Everywhere where you see green blocks, it means there's zero. There have been none of those crimes. So when we see long green rows, we get very happy because it means nothing's occurred in that particular area. And where you see a blue box, and that's the high for that week. That's the one day where that particular crime type had the most numbers for that particular day. So the top part is the crime portion. We get down on the bottom, you'll also see a similar portion where we talk about calls for service. Goes back to what I referred to earlier in regards to the sectors, but this breaks it down by day, so we can also determine how busy was that particular day. Next slide. So this is the second page, and like I said, there's multiple pages in here just to give you some idea of some other things. The next page breaks down specific information in regards to homicides, because we're obviously always interested in those. It talks about non-fatal shootings, and my glasses are bad, whatever that bottom chart is. Productivity. Okay, so it's productivity. The bottom chart is productivity. We track things like traffic stops they've been involved in. Field interviews will be people that they officer initiated, where they stopped an individual and talked to them. We also track things like the number of award services they've done. Some of the data is not on the sheet, but we can track things like the EPS or emergency psychiatric evaluations that are done for commitments. All the data is tracked, like, again, on a daily basis. Next chart. This page talks specifically regarding to assaults and domestic calls for service. Again, something we track within those various districts. So this lets an individual district commander know if they have an ongoing problem in regards to those two areas for assaults and domestics. And same basic layout you'll see, like I said, on the other sheets. Next slide. Now, after we go through the county totals within this book, the next sections that we do is we break it down by individual districts. So I'm not going to show all districts. I just put one of them up here as an example. So each morning, along with the overall report, the full command staff, including the district commanders, know this is where my district, was situated for the previous 24 hours. Let's then plan accordingly, and that way they don't have to write trying to break things out or guess on the county total what percentages they were. So it's the exact same sheet you just saw. Only this one is specifically for District 1. And again, we do this for all 8 districts. It's then followed by an actual data sheet, which, if you go to the next slide, please. Along with the numbers, they also get a chart that gives them the call for service numbers in case they want to look it up on their own. It gives them the report numbers if a report was written, so they can look up and read the report and read the details that are included in it, the date and the time of the call, the location where the call was actually dispatched to, the type of the call in regards to dispatching, and how it was cleared, as long as the beat area. So again, all this information is how they proactively manage everything they do on a daily basis. Next slide. So that information goes out internally to the department, and everyone gets that here on a daily basis. In conjunction with that, we also have various other tools that will help them in doing their jobs throughout the course of any given shift or in time frame. We have a program that's called Starlight that we use. It's a web-based program. It provides near real-time data, meaning it's based on calls for service. So data is available in the Starlight system approximately 5 or 6 minutes after a call is input into the CAD system. So it gets put in, an interface feeds into Starlight, the data is processed, and then it's available for officers to use. Starlight provides a variety of tools. I talked to a few of them on here. It can do alerts. It does mapping for them. It does comparison screens, and it can send both email and cell phone notifications for critical incidents. So if an incident was to go in, like a carjacking, for instance, it goes into the CAD system. It will feed into Starlight, and then Starlight can actually send an email notification via the county Outlook system, as well as a phone or a text message to those individuals that are involved with it. So they receive it on their cell phone, and they'll see exactly what's going on.
Can I hop in? Can I hop in here real quick? I just want to. There's been a lot of requests for folks to have the PowerPoint presentation. I was wondering, Chief, if there's anybody on your end or Miss Miriam can email it to the work group, or if someone within the work group, so we can make sure every member has a copy of this. There's a lot.
I just received it and I'm emailing it now.
Thank you very much. Okay, please continue.
Ms. Middleton, next slide, please. So what I did here was I included just a couple of screenshots of the Starlight program. Just to give you a general idea of what it looks like. So this is what the application looks like. Again, it's a web brace. When they first log into it, what they will see is the current calls for service that officers are currently working on right now. Underneath those yellow or those orangish bars, rather, you'll see a couple of red bars with a couple of districts listed. It doesn't show the full screen, but what it will occur is based upon certain call types that we flag, it'll be in there as an alert, and it will pop up in red for an individual commander to know that this is something critical they need to look at. Next slide. Some of the mapping components. So you'll see here just a map that's brought up there. So what I looked at here was I zoomed in, I believe, on one shift from yesterday up in the Hyattsville area. So what you're seeing here is sort of the District of Columbia, Hyattsville border area, District 1, and up in Northeast DC. You'll see the blue outlines, these squiggly lines you see are actually the boundaries for municipalities. So we can see what's occurring in various cities, if that's a question that comes up. Various icons you see on the screen determine the call type, and there's a whole legend that goes along with it. So things from a robbery to a traffic accident to an armed person to an officer needing assistance to a medical call, all have their own icon in regards to it. When we built this program back in 2013-ish, we did it in conjunction with the vendor as well as the Metropolitan Police Department. So what you will notice is that blue line in the lower left-hand corner is the DC border, and you'll see those same icons in the DC area. Where this becomes very useful is we share data back and forth, and it lets us know what's going on in the border areas right across the DC line, and it lets those same district commanders know what's going on here in the county. So they have access to the exact same program, and like I said, we can share the data back and forth. I don't have a live demonstration for you. We can do one later if need be, but any of those icons you see on the screen, an individual can click on an icon. It will then open up another screen for them, drilling down, and it gives them the information on the call. It gives them the date, the time, the exact address, the text the dispatcher would put in, so they can monitor in real time or near real time what's happening. Next slide. This portion is an event visualizer, and we use this for determining what's happening in a given time frame. So there's a preset program we've built in to allow commanders to go in and specify their own queries. You don't need computer knowledge or anything else like that. It's got a like a typical web screen interface. They can go in and select a time frame. They can select their district or a specific neighborhood. They can select all calls that happened or just a specific call type. In this case, it was all the calls for that particular area for the shift from yesterday. On the left-hand side, you'll see bars or rows listed for every call that happened. And then on the right side, the corresponding location where the call happened at. Next slide. This portion is a thing we refer to as a patrol daily analysis message or PDAM report. So each morning, I talked about at 7:30, everyone gets this daily crime report of everything that happened in the previous 24 hours. The next thing that we do in one of my offices is we go ahead and 3 times a day. So at 9 a.m. and noon and 3 p.m., we put out a message to the commanders to let them know what's going on right now, what's going on so far today, from midnight last night through whatever time it was. We said the last one just out a few hours ago. And this gives them all the calls that have happened in that particular location for that command. So they don't have to wait necessarily till tomorrow to see tomorrow's DCR to find out what happened today. This lets them know, again, 3 times throughout the course of a day, what's going on live right now. Next slide. So this one is very hard to read. And what this is actually a copy of an email or a screenshot of the email I received on my cell phone earlier today. This was a carjacking incident. And again, we'll send you a representation so you can read it better. But what you see on the top of it is a group of people that received the message, the date, the time. Quickly, the commanders will know what the call type was and where it happened at. All the text portion you see in the notes are things that are input by the dispatcher on back in communications. So it can include things like lookouts for individuals. It can include descriptions. It can include tag numbers of cars, colors, makes, models, any information given to them, whether there was any kind of threat done. There's COVID information that's actually included in it now, as well as any type of threats and officers may be facing going in. And on the bottom half of the screen actually gives them a map showing a rough description of where the incident occurred at, so they can see best ways in as far as routes are concerned. If traffic's bad in an area, they know how they can reroute and drive around it to get to where they have to. Next slide. So those few things we just talked about are just some of the many things we have for sharing crime and data within the police department. The next portion I'm going to touch on is just a couple of things that we have in regards to sharing the data with the community. So right now on the county website, there is a thing called the Public Open Data Portal. The site is hosted by the County Office of Information Technology, by OIT. But in regard to that, in the second column, bottom portion, you'll see a picture of a cruiser. There's actually a crime data portion in there, and citizens can click on there, open it up, log in. They have to create an account, but they can go ahead and log into it, and they can pull up a variety of information based upon the things I just showed you. So we began putting data in here in February 2017. So we have a little over 2.5 years of data that's in here. They can go in and look at a specific location, a specific crime type, an area where they live. Commercial establishments like the news media, the Washington Post uses this on a weekly basis. They download all the information, they plot it and create crime maps that end up in the newspaper. And this is where the data actually comes from. Next slide. So there's one other one, and I apologize because it's one of the slides I want to touch on from the public perspective, so you're aware of it. There's also a website called crimereports.com that citizens can go in and join. Again, free website, anyone can get into it. Our data is also on that particular site, and it's very similar to this data portal. The difference is on the data portal, it's column and row and bulk information in like a text type format, spreadsheets. On the crimereports.com, it actually provides maps. So citizens can log in, type in their address, and see everything that's occurring around them. And if you need to see that one further, I can get you some more information on that one later. In essence, Chief, that wraps up statistical. If they have any questions or you want to move into body cameras or something else.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. Obviously, it's a lot of information. Did you want us to go into body worn cameras?
No, we can ask a few questions right now. I think we were hoping to see also, looking at the presentation, hoping to see some of the data on the breakdown of race of folks been the traffic stops. Is that coming up, Chief?
So with regards to race and traffic stops, we don't capture that information. The state of Maryland has what's called an ETICS system, and that's what we utilize. So information related to traffic citations are all sent to the state of Maryland. Maryland State Police collects all of that information. And it's my understanding they do not push that information back out in terms of a breakdown with regards to sex and race.
So that's not collected at the report when someone gets pulled over. Is that against state law? Is that just something that's not collected? I mean, what do you mean? Because I've seen these reports about traffic stops and race, but so that's just not collected by the police department or the state. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. It is electronically entered and submitted to the state of Maryland. So I think with the reports you may have seen in the past were with the officers that had, when they used to write tickets. The officers don't write tickets anymore. It's all in an electronic ticket system, and that's mandated by the Maryland State Police.
Okay. Judge Lemastny?
Chief, can you break that data down into what district the traffic stop occurred in? And also, can you break it? Do you know how many of those stops resulted in arrests or charges for non-motor vehicle offenses?
Not for non-motor vehicle offenses, but again, going back to the code system that was used earlier, we can look at the way the traffic stop was coded out. So if it was, let's say a traffic stop was made and it was coded out with the first digit being 9, that would mean that it was determined on that traffic stop that that person had an open warrant. If it's coded with 7, then it would be an arrest. 3 would be no report, and then 5 would be a ticket.
But you could tell us how many of those 100,000 last year occurred in District 1 versus District 2?
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
I would like that information if you.
Excellent. Yeah, we can certainly pull that.
Let me confirm something that's been said in the chat. Is it clear that the state of Maryland collects the information, race, traffic stops based on race? That's true or not true? Just so I'm clear.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Does the state collect the traffic stop data, and does that data include race?
Yes.
Okay. I guess my question to you then, does our police department use that data in any way to inform their policies and procedures of and how we implement traffic stops here in the county? Or
So
anyway.
Maryland State Police does not disseminate that information to police departments. So we don't receive any kind of breakdown. If we did, we could, but they do not do that.
You're saying that they don't disseminate it, but can you obtain it if you wanted it?
Yes.
Okay, got it. I think I got the answer to my question. Okay, are there any other questions? Yes, Pastor Robinson, and Crystal, I'll come to you next.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Mr. Lee, on the open data format that you just talked about, does that or can that include any disciplinary actions on officers and what's going on with those actions with a particular officer? For instance, the officer that shot the guy who was handcuffed in the car. Where will we find data on his disciplinary action, or is that the kind of data that you can include in this open data format?
Yeah.
So right now, sir, no, the open data portal way it's set does specifically with calls for service and crime and traffic. We don't contain any kind of personnel or any kind of internal investigation information in there, along with the fact that we don't contain any investigative information in there. Even when it talks about things like a robbery crime or a carjacking or whatever, it will show that the offense is in there, the date, the time, and roughly where it happened. But we don't contain any type of investigative details about what's happening with that investigation, just that it occurred. And again, it's just crime related. There's nothing personnel related that's in that data.
Thank you, sir.
What's to go on Pastor Robinson's question? What system is used to collect that data and information, and where is that housed within the police department?
That would be IA Pro, and that's housed in internal affairs.
Chief, we've asked for that information several times from the IA, and we haven't gotten that information yet. My staff is confirming to see if it's in our system in the
So-
Microsoft Office suites. But are you going to go over the information today with us, the personnel data and information with us?
No, so I did get some follow-up information on that. The pulling of this information, it's a lot of information and it's very time consuming. And so let's take internal affairs. We had the departmental shooting that occurred last week, plus regular investigation. So all of that still has to go on, plus pull this information. I spoke to Major McCreary, and they are still working on that. So it's not like if, it's been put on the side. They're still working through that.
Chief, I guess my question for you then, how often is this data pulled for review for the chief to analyze and review internal affairs or personnel data to determine whether or not there's a need for policy changes within the department?
So we are in constant communication, daily basis. A case comes in, we discuss it. We'll discuss it with the deputy chiefs. So at that point, we get a briefing about all the details with regards to that investigation. So it's through daily communications. And then
the daily communications of the actual, because you're saying that it's taken a while to pull the internal affairs data that we're asking for. And we're not asking for personnel information, we're just asking for statistics on personnel matters. And so if that's taking a long time, I just wonder how often does the chief or the high level personnel review that type of data at the department?
So let me preface it by saying this. I don't know exactly what information you requested. I wasn't on that Zoom meeting, but if I'm not mistaken, Major McCreary is on the line and he can speak to that. James, are you on?
I am. I wasn't able to.
Oh, there you are.
But I don't know if they can hear me.
He's sitting right next to me. He's stuck in the room.
But
Kristen, we'll come to you in a second. My apologies.
how you doing today, everybody? The problem with the data is that it goes through so many different periods. Y'all asked for a lot of data. We tried to narrow it down to the specific allegations that Internal Affairs always investigates. So our use of force complaints, harassment complaints. We did language complaints. We also did bias-based profiling. Going through the data and making sure that it's redacted. So we're not including officers' names. We're just doing demographics, the charges, whether it's sustained or not. We also are going through terminations. And for the past 5 years, we went back. And we also are including the pending terminations. We have 23 waiting for a hearing board. And we included that information with demographics and allegations as well. So it should be done. We were hoping to have it done today, but we wanted to make sure that we had the correct charts and data. When we give it to the chief, it's in more of a raw format because he's familiar with the cases, but we want to ensure that we included charts and graphs and make sure that the information was digestible for the panel when we gave it to you. So, but it's almost complete.
And they're not going to look like one of your crazy slides, right? No.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to do. Last time I got so much flack for the flow chart. So I wanted to make sure that when you guys got the data, it was something that everybody could, digest and formulate. So.
Okay, thank you.
No,
I'll stop there. I have more questions, but let's go to.
If I can just add something real quick. So with regards to your question, when I request information from Major McCreary, I'm not asking him for a whole bunch of different investigation types and going back years, and they're not having to redact. I can simply ask how, where are we in terms of use of force complaints this year, and then he can pull that data set and say this is where we are, and then we can drill down to specific investigations to find out where the investigators are in the process.
And Chief, I think in closing this conversation, I think my concern is that information isn't readily available, and it seems as if from the answers that I'm receiving, Chief, is that it's not reviewed consistently to conduct a assessment of the police department to see what policies and procedures could be reviewed based on those things in the IA. And so I think that's where I'm coming from. And I know that from other folks that have worked in other counties, this information is readily available and accessible for them to pull, and it's not hard for them to pull and digest. Is my concern. But let me go to Crystal Oriata, who's asking the question, who wants to ask the question. Crystal.
Yeah, thank you, and just also thank you, Delegate, for raising that concern or issue about really just checking the information, because I think it paints a picture, and the fact that we're not currently checking it, I think is part of the issue. But my question was, I was going back to the original presentation that had the statistical data, and there were slides that allowed us to see like the full picture from an annual perspective, and that I think were taken out of the slides that you shared today. Or maybe I missed it because it was hard for me to follow since I didn't have the slide deck in front of me. But it looked, for example, in 2019, it references 530,000 calls. And then it shows us a breakdown of the two sections you mentioned, the violent crime as only 2,000 calls roughly, and the second bucket, the priority crimes, of only 10,000. So roughly a total of not more than 13,000 being in those two buckets. And so I just wanted to make sure I was understanding what the rest of those 400,000 calls were, because the next slide did this breakdown where you said arrest per UCR. And I just wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly. So if you could just walk me through, like, because you didn't have the slides today, that number of, from an annual perspective, because I know you showed the snapshot by like months for comparison, but to look at that data and say there's 500,000 calls and only 12,000 of them fit in those buckets that you referenced, it makes me wonder what are the rest of those calls?
Sure, no problem whatsoever. It's a valid question, absolutely. So if you remember, one of the first things I talked about, I showed just a quick synopsis of like the types of calls for service. And I touched on the fact there were hundreds of types of calls that could go in there. So fortunately for all of us, the crime that we handle within the county is a very small percentage of the total calls of the things that we deal with on a daily basis. So the other types of things can be litanies of items. Things like traffic accidents are not included in there. Loud parties are not included in there. Disorderly people, citizen complaints, officers working their employment, you name it. It goes on and on and on. But hundreds of thousands of those things that we do on a yearly basis are not a result of a crime that happened. That DPR thing, unfortunately, that are only the crime where there's a victim in the county, as opposed to all those other types of things that happen. And again, when I gave that example, I just showed those two charts, that one slide, and I think they shared a slide deck with you. It's like alphabetical by call types. We can share that if you want the full data. We can pull it up for every year of every call type, and you will see how many of those that are in there. But there are literally, I mean, there's 50,000 traffic stops that happen over the course of a year. There's many disorderly complaints that happened, and other complaints that we get, citizen disagreements, loud neighbors, a party complaint, all of those things. Domestics are not a separate category. So all of those things would make up those missing hundreds of thousands you're touching on.
Right. And I think that kind of information would be helpful, because the chart I'm looking at, when you're looking at the original presentation you sent, you kind of see like a high number being like disorderly conduct, and a high number being things.
Crystal, are you there? Is your internet go out? I know that it's raining right now, and I know the judge just had to hop
Like rested.
Hey, Crystal, we didn't hear that because your internet went out a little bit. I know that it's raining right now in the county, and so everybody's electricity is popping up and stuff. So go ahead. I'm sorry. We didn't.
Oh yeah, I was just saying I would like that information, the breakdown, because the one that in the original presentation you sent, it did paint an interesting picture, because a high number of arrests, for example, were disorderly conduct. and drug-related crimes. So I think when we're having this conversation as a work group and we're trying to have an understanding about, you know, making sure that officers, their use of time is spent in the right place, and maybe there's other types of calls that should not be handled by officers, and then getting a clear picture of the types of crimes that our citizens or residents are being arrested for. I think that kind of information would be important to have. So thank you.
So, no, that's no problem whatsoever. I'll take that. I'll remember myself a note. We'll take this as a follow-up. We can produce information for you. I will throw one thing out there, if it's okay with you, is I touched earlier, we went to this new CAD system in 2016, partially through the year. So that data is a little mixed between two systems. It's difficult to pull, but I can easily, if we just go back with like the last 3 years, would that suffice? If we pull, 18, 19, 20, and I'll give you the whole years of every call type. So there might be 200 of them, and the totals. So you'll see, like you touched on, 50,000 here, 40,000 there, 100,000 here, and you'll have that breakdown. So we'll get it and get it sent to you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, any other questions? Councilman Streeter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just curious whether or not you have stats on the number of calls, the number of stops that you make that involve a weapon, and whether or not, there's a list of weapons confiscated, and if there's an attempt to identify the source of those weapons.
So we do have part of that information. So remember earlier when I talked to you about that configuration of those call clearance codes, and I talked about those numbers they touched on, and I touched about the last character being a special character. So one example I gave was breaking down between like burglary locations, residents and homes and things like that. In conjunction with that, with the assault categories, we have a suffix of a W that comes into play, signifying to us that a weapon was involved on that call. So again, I can pull that out. It's partial. It won't tell you the type of weapon necessarily at that level. It doesn't show how many weapons were involved. But yes, we can pull out to determine. So for instance, like with all the assaults, how many of those involved the weapon and how many were just, a hand, a fist, a fight, that type of thing. So yeah, we can pull out part of it for you.
But off the top of your head, what percentage would you say are calls where they're pretty routine traffic stops?
Sir, I'd be lying because I don't want to go off the top of my head because I don't have any of the data in front of me right now. But if you're asking, like we're asking about traffic stops and how many of them, like you touched on, routine, were you asking how many involve a weapon or how many don't involve a weapon?
How many don't involve a weapon? Yeah, it's primarily what I'm.
Yeah, I could pull numbers again. It would be the overwhelming majority. My guess, and again, I'm guessing just because I'm dealing with the data, but 96, 97% or more never involve a weapon. It's probably only 2% that would involve a weapon. It's low.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief, can I ask a question? Can you pull the data from the state, traffic data from the state to analyze the racial breakdown of that data for the last 5 years of Prince George's County, so we get a depiction of what that looks like? And I know that we have access to it, so I think it'll be good to have that information.
Yeah, yes, and Alan, can you explain the complexity of that?
Yeah, yes, sir. We can pull it. It's going to take some time because it, like the chief touched on, the system isn't ours. It belongs to Maryland State Police. I do have a contact with them there. We can do a data extract, there's a thing called data back. However, the data comes over in a very large generated computer file. It's not very user friendly. It involves some cleaning, some mapping, a bunch of things that have to happen. But yes, we can pull it in regards to it. So if I go back, and again, I've got to determine because of records retention, how long they keep it. I believe we can do 5. I know they keep at least 3. They probably keep more. So I made a note about the 5 years. So are you looking for anything specifically or just the breakdown for each year to say there were 100,000 stops, there were this many, based upon race, there were this many based upon gender? Is that what you're looking at, or for something more granular?
Correct. I mean, I think it's about analyzing the data of how we are, what race we're pulling over most than others. If there's any disparities there that could inform our training methods, And, so I'm looking for that type of data to help inform training, to help inform our recommendations, based on what happens in the county. And based on the track, and, again, I think it goes back to Ms. Oriata's question, or comment, which is, we're trying to figure out, what is the best use of the police officer's time? And so, should it be used on traffic stops? Should it be used on mental health? Should it be, what is that? And so, and I think also, I didn't see any data, I didn't see any calls for service in there for the mental health. Maybe I just missed that because the slide went really fast, but it would be good to have that information if anything dealing with mental health came up to, or social services or things of that nature. I know homelessness, things of that nature will be great to have too. Does that make sense, sir?
Yes, sir, absolutely. So I'll go back, I'll get a hold of Maryland State Police, and we'll start working on that portion for you for the traffic stuff, going back as far as we can, breaking down the demographics. When it comes to mental health, I can pull some basic numbers, but all we are able to extract and we track internally is those instances where an emergency psychiatric services evaluation was done, where we took someone to the hospital for an EPS, as we referred to it. That doesn't necessarily track things like dealing with the homelessness, or dealing with people with mental illness or other needs based on the street. We would only track it if we actually take them to a hospital and have them committed.
Got it. Thank you very much. The next question, and welcome back, Judge Lemastny.
Thank you.
We live close by, and so the rain just went right over us.
Yes, that's right. Knocked out my Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Mr. Ivy, you have a question?
I was going to ask if in the demographic check you're going to do, if there's a way to include age as well. I mean, look, just to be explicit about it, the concern is that the police stop young Black males disproportionately. The suggestion is that it's part of the police department's strategy to do that and to focus on them. And I want to know if, well, A, if that is the view from a policymaking standpoint, but B, I want to see the numbers so I can have a sense of whether that's borne out or not. And then the layover I want with that would be, what's the benefit of those? So I think somebody else has asked about, what results from these, you guys getting people with warrants or guns or whatever, because I think that goes to Ms. Oriata's issue, which is, if we've got a lot of police officers doing these traffic stops, and there's something that looks like a driving while a young Black male result, and there's no great public benefit to it, why do we continue to do it? In fact, even if there is, quote unquote, a great public benefit to it, which I guess would be you're seizing a lot of guns or something, I think there's still a concern that could be raised about doing it anyway. So is there a way, let me ask you, what would be the best way to get to the bottom of that from a statistical standpoint?
So first, we can parse that information out by age. And let me say that is not the policy of the Prince George's County Police Department. And if that were happening, we'd put a stop to that. Or, if that were an allegation, we would investigate that. But we'd have to look at the data that Maryland State Police sends over to be able to give you a percentage to answer your question. Anything to add?
No, we'll go ahead and I believe we can pull age. The problem is that is an optional field on the system. The way the state police built the ETIC system, an officer can estimate an age, and if a person doesn't have a driver's license on them and refuse to provide their date of birth. So I believe we can pull part of that information, and I'll include that with the data extract. So we'll be able to analyze what we have there. When it talks about policies and procedures that we're touching on, and I just, it's probably worth saying that you asked me earlier in regards to what percentage of stops involve a weapon. And, we talked about that, just guessing, we can pull more data in regards to it. But I do know we are recovering, guns and things out of vehicles. That would be a separate study we'd have to look at, and we could put together more information in regards to it. When it comes to stopping the individual, it's worth noting, at least throwing out there, that many times, in fact, I would say again, the majority of the times, the officer doesn't see and can't tell who's driving the vehicle when they stop a vehicle. We see a vehicle from many yards away being committed, some type of a violation, draw attention to the vehicle in regards to it. Now, it's different if we're looking for a vehicle because we've been given information by a victim that says, hey, it was a blue Honda. But just in a normal case of routine patrol, routine traffic stops you're touching on, quite often we have no idea, the officer had no idea who or what is driving that vehicle until they have stopped the car and walk up to the car. So it's worth commenting on.
Can I follow up on that? I mean, I think, yeah, if it's 3 a.m., that's a good bet that, somebody my age isn't going to be out there driving on, say, a Thursday night. But I got to say, I mean, I just my personal experience, after I went gray, I stopped getting stopped. It just doesn't happen anymore. Even though officers don't remember who I was. The patrol officers you got out there don't know I was state's attorney, and they're not making the decision based on that. 20 years ago, I used to get stopped. My 5 sons get stopped all the time. We've got a whole strategy. Here's what you do when it happens, and keep your hands on the wheel and all that stuff. This is real. And so, and to be really explicit, I've had officers tell me that that they stop people that they think are likely to be carrying, that they think are riding dirty, quote unquote. And those are young black males in their minds. So to me, I think we're going to have to go deeper than that. Now, if the data shows otherwise, I'll stand corrected, but I'm going to be really surprised if, for example, white women over like 45 are the ones that are getting stopped more than young black males. I want to see that. I want to see that data, but I'm willing to bet good money that it's young black males that are getting stopped the vast majority of the time for things like rolling through a stop sign, broken taillight, or in the instance of the last one I had with one of my sons, a broken taillight when the taillight was fine. At least when I got on the phone with the officer, all of a sudden the taillight was fine. So let's get the data. I don't want to, let me get off the soapbox, but I do want, and I hope from leadership at the police department that there's going to be a very close and skeptical look at sort of the conventional wisdom of, we don't do that. That's not our policy. Because I think what's the reality is what's happening in the communities certainly challenges that, to say the least.
Thank you. And I would hope that an incident like that is reported to us so that we can conduct an investigation, because if that is happening and we don't know about it, we can't address it. But for instance, the officer that pulled your son over for the broken taillight that miraculously got fixed, that's something we need to know about so that we can address it. So that's all, but we'll pull that information for you.
Can you also pull the information, Chief, for the other crime statistics based on race as well? That'd be good to have as well, or age.
Which crimes?
The larceny, burglary.
Okay, UCR.
All the UCR data. Yep.
I'm not going to have anything other than that.
Right. So we would only have that for arrests.
Arrests by burglary, okay. So would you have the different types of arrests broken down then?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay. Any other questions? I see a few in the Ms. Pruitt. Yes. And then Ms. Gutierrez, if you want to ask a question, let me know. And I see you putting it in there, but Ms. Pruitt and then Ms. Gutierrez.
Oh, thank you, Chief. And so this question is actually a follow-up to Mr. Ivy's question, which I really wasn't going to ask, but I am going to ask now, that if you have a complaint that an officer is racially profiling drivers on traffic stops, how do you determine whether that is true or not?
So we can determine.
I'm sorry, let me finish the question. I apologize.
okay.
If you're not able to pull up the e-tics information, how do you determine a pattern that this officer might have?
So one way we can do that is by reviewing the mobile video systems in the car, and looking at the traffic stops, looking at if that officer has a body-worn camera, reviewing video there, and doing audits of his traffic stops, radio calls, CAD or going through the CAD system. There are a number of data sets that we can pull to see if in fact that is the case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Gutierrez?
Yes, mine is a simple one. I just wanted to go back to slide 17 that had the districts labeled by letters. Would you be able to just review that? I think this was Mr. Lee. Which districts belong to which letter?
Sure, absolutely. So District 1, which is our Hyattsville area, is A and B, so Adam and Baker sector. District 2, which is like the Bowie area, is David and Edward. District 3, which is like the area around Seat Pleasant and around FedEx Field, is G. District 4, which is down the Oxon Hill type area, Temple Hills, is J and K. District 5, which is the area around Clinton, is F. District 6, which is the area around Beltsville and Laurel, is C. District 7, which is the area down in Fort Washington, is W. And the final one is District 8, which is the area here where headquarters is now at, and a lot of District Heights type area, and that area is H.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And when you submit this to us, and I think for all the data, I think it can be submitted to us it doesn't have to be presented here, but it can be submitted to us and we can break down the data, but we also obviously want you to break down the data so it makes sense to us. But and I know it's sometimes a lot of paperwork for data, but I think we're able to have it and we can upload it to our shared file so everybody can see it. But let me go to a question, and then we're going to take these next two questions, Chief, and then we're going to move on to the rest of the presentation for about 15 minutes, if that's okay. And then we'll finish out with any questions you want to ask the Chief at all. So let's go to Ms. Josephine, and then we'll have Ms. Oriata with just one question.
Excuse me. Good evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chief, for that presentation. Since you did hit upon the body cam, I have a question. You say that you can get statistics about how many stops the officer makes according to his camera or his body cam. Is that did I understand you right on that?
No, we can review video footage.
Of what?
Of stops. We can just go through his video footage and see whatever traffic stops, his in-car camera, we can pull those videos as well.
So they must always have their in-car camera on?
In order for us to review the video, but we can also pull data sets from, when they call out on traffic stops for any type of actions that they take on the scene. All of that is documented. It could be captured in the RMS system. So there are a number of things that we can look into.
Okay, because they do have the option of turning that camera off in the car.
Right. Well, we're very, very aware of that. And our investigators do look into that as well.
Okay, then, yes, because I'm really concerned about that since I understand the more body cams have come in and they're going to be required to wear this, but are they going to be required to have them on? This is our main concern.
Yes, they'll be required to have them on. And just because we don't see video, we don't say, okay, there's no video, so it didn't happen. We will continue the investigation and exhaust all means to prove or disprove the allegation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Crystal, Ms. Oriata?
Yeah, just a follow up from Ms. Pruitt's question, because you answered that if a complaint like that's made, that you go through these steps to see if there's racially biased officers. So when you do provide us that data about from internal affairs, I'm just curious about, one, how you track those types of investigation about racially biased officers, and then two, the outcomes of those types of allegations. Because I hear that there's a process. I'm just curious about how many of those have you actually investigated, and then what were the outcomes of those? So just highlighting that once you provide that data, that's something that if we can see that, I think it would be a good thing to pull out.
Sure, and that allows me to go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of information that's provided. So when a complaint comes in, it is entered into into IA Pro, and based on the circumstances that's described by the complainant, it'll be categorized. So if it is a bias, if somebody's complaining that they were pulled over because of their race, then it's investigated as such, and that's recorded. It's entered into, it's logged into the book. It's entered into IA Pro. It's given a IA case number, and then that investigation proceeds, and then it is reviewed by the lieutenant, captain, and then major. So. And with Major McCreary, he does provide information. It's just raw data that he provides me. It's not, information is not redacted. It's not in charts. It's not in graphs or things like that. But that's something that we talk about quite a lot. But we don't get many bias complaints, and I can get the exact number for you.
Thank you, Chief. Let's move on to the. I see some comments. Let's move on to the rest of the presentation, and then we'll ask questions after that. So we can do that until about 6:35, Chief, or 6:40, and then we'll take questions from there. Is that cool? Whatever.
So we left off.
Ryan, can you pop up the presentation, please?
Yep. Give me 1 second.
I think you're on body cameras, Chief.
Correct. I'll go ahead and get started. So our body-worn camera program is operated out of our IT division, and Mr. Lee is in the process of getting body cameras out to the officers, and also installing equipment in the cars to ensure that they have body cameras that they can take home, and more importantly, that they can also wear, in part-time work, so we can mandate that they have them on. But I'll have Mr. Lee go into where we are in terms of getting them out in the streets and the process that we are utilizing.
Okay, Mr. Milton, just the first slide, please. Okay, so a little bit of history. Prior to March of this year, we had already begun deploying body cameras. We began deployment of body cameras with the agency as part of a pilot or a test program back in 2019, so about a little over a year and a half ago. At that point, we had very limited funding available, so we had purchased about 100 cameras that we had. In order to save economy of scale and money, we went with a Panasonic body camera. The reason for that is we touched on mobile video earlier a couple of times, like traffic stops or whatever. We have a Panasonic mobile video system in place. So by going with their body cameras, it lets us use the same storage mechanism, same servers and things of that nature. So Panasonic is our vendor. With those 100 cameras we had, what we did was we deployed one or a group of cameras to one patrol squad within each of those district stations we talked about earlier. So we deployed them to 8 patrol squads, as well as the 2 special operations division. I've got a dedicated traffic enforcement squads that just, primarily make traffic stops. So we also outfitted those 2 squads with a total of 89 cameras that we deployed prior to March of this year. The reason I talk about March as a time frame, back around that general time frame, the question of body cameras came back up and expanding the program. The county executive was gracious enough to make sure money was allocated in this coming, our current fiscal year budget will be available after July 1st to begin expanding the program and try and get all the patrol outfitted. Next slide. So in May 2020, we looked at how we begin building and growing the program. We knew money was coming, but it wouldn't be available for a few months until the new budget happened. Graciously at that point, the existing chief, Chief Zawinski, and Sheriff High reached an agreement. The Sheriff's Department had approximately 100 body cameras that were theirs. They had purchased, they had not deployed. So they agreed to loan us those cameras with the understanding that once we start purchasing everything on our end, we'll reimburse them and give them their 100 cameras back. So in May going into June, we received another 100 cameras. We ran into a couple of technical difficulties. We couldn't start deploying them right away. We had to find, along with the charging bays, mounting clips, just logistical type things like that. But the point is, in July, we began deploying those extra 100 cameras. Next slide. So what we did, and let me follow up on an item I didn't have there with 100 cameras. So what we did with those 100 cameras is we began focusing on one patrol district. The first district we were asked to equip was District 4, so the Oxon Hill area. Between June, July, we've outfitted all of District 4. So every patrol squad, that particular district station has 10 patrol squads there. They're now all outfitted with a camera, as well as a few other ones that we refreshed. So that 89 number I talked about in March, currently today, we've got about 174, I think it is, cameras that are on the street. Talking about the storage portion here, because that's a big part when we talk about body cameras. So the back-end storage for all the videos, mobile video as well as body cameras, has been upgraded to a new thing called Panasonic Unified Evidence Management Software. It allows us to monitor the information. It involves things like you touched on earlier. The chief can pull up a video and watch an in-car video as soon as it's loaded on the server. It allows us to share information with the state's attorney's office or outside sources, defense attorneys. We can send them links to videos. And the whole point is it gets us out of the business of having to make and copy DVDs and doing that type of sharing video back and forth between people. As of about a month since implementing UDE back in July, so over the last 2 months, we've already uploaded approximately 18,000 videos in regards to body camera incidents and traffic stops combined together. Between our old unified evidence management system, the old Panasonic storage, and our current UDE system, we've got about 1.5 million videos that are currently loaded in the system. Next slide. When it comes to the actual program itself, it's sort of a joint venture. The Office of Homeland Security, Public Safety Communications currently has the Panasonic contract. So the money that was designated to progress this program is not with the police department. It's not part of our budget. It's nowhere in our funding sources. The money was actually given to Homeland Security, and they're responsible for purchasing all the cameras and then working with us and the Mobile Technology Center to actually get things installed and up and running. We placed the order for these next 900 some odd cameras we're getting. We expect we're going to receive our first order of about 200 cameras. We're around the middle of this month, so in the next few weeks, we'll get those, and the deployment's going to continue. The plan is right now to equip all of the patrol officers. So we have 55 patrol squads, as well as special operations, which will equate to approximately 900 body cameras in use by the time we're done. Time frame for everything for full deployment, we're shooting for the end of the year. We're still being optimistic that we can reach that goal. COVID and a few other things that slowed things down, getting things rolling and getting equipment from Panasonic. But we're actively installing cameras on a daily basis, 5 days a week right now. Next slide. That's
the vehicles.
So the chief asked me to touch on something else with you. As part of the program, we also did a few things to bring things into line with our policy that we're doing. When the first pilot program was developed, in order, the officer wears a camera, and you've seen pictures and news articles of officers wearing body cameras. The question is, how do you get the video out of that camera and back into a usable server to store on the back end? So currently that's done by a docking mechanism. So in each of the sergeant's desk, there's a docking bay. The officer takes the camera off, they place a docking bay that charges the camera for the next shift when they come in. It also offloads all their video. So the sergeant issues all the cameras at the beginning of their shift. At the end of the shift, they're collected, put in the bay, and they charge, and a video is offloaded for the next day. It's a process that works, but we felt we could make it better. We can improve upon that. So one of the things that we did along with part of this money with buying new cameras, we're also going to we have begun installing in-car vehicle docks. So now the dock will actually be installed inside the patrol officer's vehicle. That does several things. It allows them to be able to charge on the fly. It allows them to be able to upload and share video on the scene of an incident, if need be, before they come back to the station. And more importantly, it will allow them to now begin taking those cameras home with them. So one of our concerns had to do with it was if the camera has to be docked in the station and the officer was off duty and they were going somewhere, let's say to work a secondary employment type job, or they're going to work overtime at a Redskins game, or maybe working at MGM at National Harbor, they didn't have that body camera available necessarily to them because it was locked in the sergeant's office where their normal duty assignment happens. Now, because of being in the car, they will be issued that camera to take home with them, just like a radio, just like a firearm or anything else. That'll make them available to them 24 hours a day, and it's going to increase the presence. Another thing we're doing is we're installing a piece of hardware called a trigger box, a common trigger box that's inside the car in the trunk, and it ties the body camera to the mobile video with same automatic tracking mechanisms, meaning that if the officer's in the car and they turn on their overhead lights and emergency equipment, their mobile video system and their body camera will automatically turn on. It does it with the policy says the officer will manually turn it on anytime they get dispatched to a call. But just in case something happens and they don't, when they turn those lights on, their camera comes on. It also automatically activates if the officer or the car is involved in a crash of that nature. Another portion that will happen is if the officer stops an individual, not based on a call for service, but they see an individual they just want to stop and they pull up on the side of the road and someone's in a parking lot and they get out to talk to an individual. When they turn their body camera on, it will also automatically turn on their in-car camera, even if that was off. So it's a synchronization process that we built between the mobile video and the body camera. Any questions on that?
We're not going to take any questions at this moment. We want to go through the presentation so that we can, and I know that folks are writing down their questions right now, and so we'll come back in a second. So Chief, can we go through this next section for the next 10 minutes?
Sure, and this will be Deputy Chief Jackie Raftery and Major Steve Ewan, who works out of our Planning and Research Division.
Good morning, or afternoon, I'm sorry. Want me to hold on just a second? Okay, I think we're good now.
Hey, Deputy Chief, can you hear me, or is it your internet working?
Yes.
Okay, can you
Yes, it's finally
explain?
working.
Great. Can you explain what the Planning and Research Division does and is? I'm sure you were going to go through that, but I think it's the first time we're seeing this division, so it'd be good to know what you guys do.
I can do that. It's Planning and Research is the division in the police department that develops all policies and procedures. It develops them for our general order manual that is disseminated to all of our officers. It looks at new laws coming into effect and what we need to change, and they review our policies and procedures on a pretty regular basis just to make sure we're within the law or if it needs to be changed for whatever reason. So that's basically what they do in the short version. Major Ewan, who has had to step away, is the major in charge of planning and research. Part of the reason why I became part of this part of the, as the DOJ is in a former life here. I was part of the compliance team that was, that handled all the, all of the implementation of the MOA. That we were, in 2004, we entered into an agreement with the Department of Justice that had 67 paragraphs. And what we had to develop to become in compliance with that. We're in substantial compliance with 66 of the 67 compliance or paragraphs that were in the agreement. And the only reason we weren't in an agreement with the one, it was a 90-day policy for internal affairs. And because of all the additional reviews we had in place, they felt that was actually better than what the agreement said. So they decided that we were in technical compliance, and we closed out the agreement in January of 2009. Can we go to the next slide, please? That was basically what I went through. The Office of the Law at the time is the one that sat down with the Department of Justice and came up with the 67 paragraphs. They all dealt from, to go just an overview, from dealing with the mentally ill to internal affairs to our training and education, what we taught, to record keeping and that kind of information. We developed during that time our use of force continuum, our use of force, we sharpened our use of force policies and decided where we are going to keep all policies and procedures for training, and otherwise it would be kept in training. So any training that you've done on the police agency, all of that is going to be kept in our training division so that it's easy accessible to everyone. Can you go to the next slide, please? We had a team of monitors that came in quarterly, and they would review, we would send them documentation we'd send them our internal investigations, and they would review them. We would send them copies of our CIRs, our Commander's Information Reports for uses of force. They also reviewed all of our documentation for any time we completed an emergency petition for someone that was mentally ill. They also came in and reviewed in-car camera footage. We also developed at the time a records management and an EIS system that we had set up and put in place, but unfortunately, right after the agreement was done, the chief at the time decided not to continue with that records management system. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I'll just give you an example with what we did with the mentally ill. They would do a sampling of reports. We'd give them like a download, and they'd given us a sampling of reports, and they'd look over our documentation and decide if it met the criteria, like just for mentally ill per se, the two-pronged criteria under the law in Maryland, which is that they're a danger to themselves and others, or there's a clear mental disorder. They would check to see if we had the documentation in there. And then they would, we have to be in substantial compliance once, and then that we had to maintain that for 2 years in order to get out of the agreement. And that's what we did with all the paragraphs. So they did a systematic review of all the things on here, like the mentally ill, the use of force policies, evaluations. We came up with a new form. We came up with a review process up through the commander, that they would review it and make comments and reviews of, after reviewing the whole documentation, a time frame for use of force. That within 14 days, a supervisor has to have that up to the command officer so they could be submitted to internal affairs. That was, you look at any kind of footage that you had, you talk to witnesses and so forth, and that was at the supervisory level. And then you had other layers on top of that to review it and make sure that that if there were issues, they were addressed, whatever that was. Because after the sergeant looked at it, then you had the lieutenant, the captain, and the major, and then it went to internal affairs for a final review. Those are the kind of things that we did during this whole thing. This took 5 years to do. we were in a 3-year agreement, and we realized after starting it that it took us longer than we first thought to come up with the appropriate changes in our general orders. Chief Velez was on a team of like 3 that overwrote our whole general orders at the time. And so we basically overlooked our whole general order, rewrote it, and brought it into what we thought is compliance. Can I go to the next slide, please? We also had a consent decree also going on at the same time. That actually happened before our MOA, and they came in and we changed our whole procedures at the time, and we went to a Barkin Bay. We had a specialist come in from out in LA, and they helped rewrite our general orders. We had the Justice Department that came out and met. We did not have a monitor per se for that. It was directly with the Department of Justice that they had an expert come out and work with us, and they oversaw it themselves. And that also was, we came into compliance with that. And just to make note that all these changes we did during the MOA and the consent decree are all still in practice now. We have not really changed anything after we signed off on this and we're found in compliance. Next slide, please. And this is what I talked about, all the changes we went through. We talk about our early identification system. We strengthened that and came up with a system. Our mobile crisis team that we have, one of the things we were able to do when we first entered into the MOA was it was not 24/7, but it enabled us to have the mobile crisis team to be 24/7 in the county. So they assist us, and they now have licensed social workers on their team, so they can even do the paperwork if we'll transport. That's a really good skill to or partnership to have, because it really we're amateurs in that field, and to have an expert on the scene to help us is phenomenal, and it really helps the officers. We also, during that time, you have to get approval from a supervisor in order to do a emergency petition. We rewrote our field training program. That's what when an officer graduates from the academy, they have to drive with a experienced officer 60 days. We rewrote our program, our policy during that time, and strengthened it, and wrote a whole document that we still follow. We ensured that it was great accessibility to filing a complaint. We even went out to the libraries to ensure that they had proper forms there and everything else, and now they're online. Those are the kind of things. Next slide. It's just the same. I talked about the use of force continuum and de-escalation techniques that we institutionalized then, we still use now. We prohibited chokeholds. It wasn't prohibited, but we made sure it was in our policy after that. We standardized forms for the use of force during that time frame. And I'm going quick because I know you said we had to be done too.
I unmuted myself to hop in here a little bit.
So, and these are one of the things that I do want to touch on before because we've gone through this quickly, and you guys can go through and obviously give me more, ask me questions. But we also do an executive review panel where we pull everybody together after a critical incident, and we go through it from either evidence from the investigators. We bring people from the outside, that citizens that come in and sit in there while we go through the whole incident, and we come up with training that could be better, what we could have done better, what we could have done different. And we write a whole report, and that's under the Inspector General's office that they do that, and we submit the report. So we're trying to make ourselves better in that aspect, to look at best practice, to look at what we can use and better. And then a lot of times training takes that and incorporates it in training the following year, that, this is what happened and this is how we could have done this better or differently. So. Melinda, stop it there. Anybody have any questions?
Sure. Can we go to the next slide and have the chief come in here? I know that his final slides are about challenges. And so, Chief, if you can quickly go through some of the challenges you have in here. It's towards the end of the slide. You talk about some of the challenges that you have or that you've seen.
Yes, sir. And this falls under Deputy Chief Nichols' Bureau, which is Bureau of Forensic Science and Intelligence. And he will be reporting out on the next couple of slides.
And if we have the slides, if we can go through it about 2 minutes or so we can start engaging and having a dialogue, Chief, that'd be great.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Good evening, Councilman. I'm sorry, Delegate Washington. What we'll talk about in my bureau, some of the things that I've seen as challenges are getting the qualified civilian positions for the skilled positions such as DNA analysts, drug analysts, and latent print unit personnel. Some of the things that we were able to do is about last year, we did what we call a desk audit. So what that entails is that we take people who perform these same positions in the region, Howard County, FBI, Baltimore County, and do a comparison of the salaries. What they did discover is, in fact, that Prince George's County, we weren't commiserate with the other agencies. That has since been rectified. And I believe that I just submitted employment packages for 10 to 12 people to start filling these positions. So that is the great news. We just weren't able to keep step with that, but after we did this desk audit, we were now able to get the qualified people, offer the appropriate compensation, and that should now be something that we should be able to take off the board here.
And that's it, sir? That's it?
I'm sorry, Delegate, I didn't hear you.
I was saying, do you have any, did you want to go through the rest of the chat? Is that it? This is all, everything else is fine. These are the chat. This is what you wanted to go through. Can you hear me now? No.
I can hear you now. Go ahead, sir.
Oh yeah, I was asking, are you complete? Are you complete with your presentation?
In regards to the challenges, and that's from my bureau in regards to what we were finding with the, just trying to get the skilled personnel for those positions. Now, one of the successes, if you go to the next slide, well, if anybody does anybody have any questions? On the next slide, which also pertains to my bureau, is you'll see that we were awarded the William French Smith Award. That award is given to us because the Gun Intelligence Unit is assigned to the ATF here in Prince George's County. And they partnered together in which they made substantial increases in gun arrests and prosecution. We had 88 cases involving handguns be submitted for what they call federal prosecution, had 36 that were actually submitted, 25 have been accepted to be federally prosecuted, and the other 11 right now are under review, which we hope that they too are, that they'll receive federal prosecution. The rest have now been reverted back to the state's attorney's office for prosecution. But they did receive the award for that collaborative effort and cooperative law enforcement effort with the ATF. And our forensic science division, as you can see, has maintained their accreditation throughout the ANAB standards, which means that we are fully certified to do our own in-house DNA analysis and everything. Now, we do also receive grant money, which we will outsource certain cases because we did have some issues with personnel or shortages. This also allowed us to make sure that we can get these cases done, get DNA processed in a timely fashion so cases can go forward. So these are the two successes that I'm very proud of within that division.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Let's move on to questions and for the chief and anyone else. Chief, if you're back, I do have a quick question for you, just right off the top, because the gentleman mentioned accreditations. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Can you just describe why the Prince George's County Police is no longer nationally accredited by ACLEA, I believe it's called.
Aaliyah.
And
Yes.
can you explain why we aren't and if we should be accredited?
So there were a myriad of issues that we faced with our reaccreditation. From the point that we were accredited, we were successful in getting reaccredited. Our reaccreditation happened to be falling at a time where we had switched from our old system to our RMS. So that would have required a complete rewrite of the policies to reflect those changes. We had our CALEA monitor retire. And there was also a requirement that all of our policies be up to, I can't recall the name of the system, that they all be updated into that system. So you're looking at price, I think it was like $100,000. So our concern was that we could not change that reaccreditation date. So if they came out, we would not be reaccredited because we're in the midst of changing our how we go about getting calls for service and things like that. So there were a number of reasons why we had reached out. And
Chief, do we have that in writing somewhere of reasons why we weren't accredited? And then do you know when the last time we were accredited? When did we stop our accreditation?
I believe it was 2014.
2014. Okay.
Through 17. So it expired in 2017.
2017 expired. Okay.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you. And if you can give us a list of reasons why we weren't accredited, that would be great to have. That's something that we're reviewing here.
Perfect.
Judge Lemaznik, let me come to you. You have any questions?
No questions.
Okay, perfect. Joe Ruddy, you have any questions? You have any question? I saw you had your hand up last time.
Wanted to ask, we're going to circle back on this issue concerning was traffic stops and some of the data that was collected. And one of the things I wanted to follow up on is, I know there was a lot of questions about that data and kind of looking at things historically as to what officers are doing. But I believe there's policies you guys have in the department that requires supervisors to review dash camera video every month. And it also requires that, because all of these officers are subject to a performance evaluation, the supervisor should be, without notifying the officers, contacting people in the community they come into contact with to determine who they're coming into contact with and what their interactions are. Is that still being done? Because that was one of the ways that officers were supposed to be being evaluated proactively so that you wouldn't have to have an internal affairs investigation to determine if somebody was having interactions that were problematic.
Absolutely. And our supervisors are required to do those video reviews, spot check reviews 2 times a month. They are required to do trail audits. And again, the officer is unaware that the trail audits are being done or who in fact is being contacted in those trail audits.
Thanks, Chief.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Lottridge.
Hi, actually, I think some of my questions may have already been answered. I had wanted to make the point, but I think the chief has already said he's going to get us the data on the number of racial bias complaints and the results. So that's already been covered. For the body cameras, I'm trying to make sure they're only activated when the officer physically turns them on or when the lights come on. Is that correct? And this is for uniform officers only?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways. So there's a button on the front, the officer taps to turn the camera on. So the policy we put into place says that anytime an officer is dispatched to the call for service, so they're told to go somewhere to handle a call, they're required to, as soon as they acknowledge that on the radio that they're en route, they're required to turn the camera on at that point. The idea being that we're building muscle memory in regards to them doing it. It also removes the high stress portion of them pulling up on the scene and the crime unfolding or something happening when they pull up and then forgetting to turn it on. So we're teaching them to turn it on as soon as they get the call. That way we capture the drive to the scene as well as everything that's going on. Policy says they will not, generally speaking, they will not turn that camera off until they've done that final code we talked about, and they've cleared the call for service. At that point, they can turn it off. There is an exception. Someone asked a question earlier about can they turn it off? Well, so physically, yes, they can. The only time that's allowed is if for some reason a citizen requests it be turned off, and they evaluate based upon the information they're being given or want to obtain that it needs to be turned off. But that request and the acknowledgement is going to be required to be captured on the tape. So there's no reason they should be turning it off at random without something being recorded saying, I'd like to talk to you, can you turn the camera off? So then they will do that. In conjunction with the manual process, I talked about the in-car triggering mechanism. So we built a Bluetooth component inside the police car that when they turn their lights on inside the vehicle, it will then turn on automatically for them. It just gives them a backup system in case something was to happen.
You answered the second part of my question, which was whether it reciprocated. How long, the other problem you have is the amount of data you're going to collect is enormous. You already have over 1 million videos or whatever that is, and the storage capacity and how long you intend to keep basically the data from collected.
Yep. So the way our system is currently designed right now, and we realize we're still in the infancy stages of body camera, it's going to develop over the coming years. But we have contracted and worked again that partnership between the County Office of Information Technology, the County Office of Homeland Security, and a vendor, local company, a Prince George's County company that OIT uses for data storage. So what we've done is we built a hybrid system. And what I mean by that is the initial data when it's received is kept on site, or we refer to as on-prem, meaning it's kept here on a local server for the first year. That is part of a backup scheduling like that, so we're not worried about losing information. The reason for that process is, generally speaking, if we're looking at complaints, we're looking at critical incidents, things we have to investigate, usually they occur within that first year. We know about them, that's the general time frame. After that year time frame elapses, the data is moved to an offsite location, and we maintain all the data for a minimum of 3.5 years. That brings us in line with a Federal Civil Tort Claim Act that says if you wish to file a complaint against an officer, you have 1 year to do it within the state, you have 3 years to do it federally. When we looked at that category, Officer Law weighed in and suggested we keep it for that 3-year time frame. I added an additional 6 months to that based upon the fact I was concerned that if someone filed it federally at year 2 day 364, that it could be a month or so before we got notified about the complaint. So I built an extra 6 months into the process before we dispose of it. That's just for general video, no matter what it might be. There are other records retention schedules that kick in based upon certain other things. So if the video is deemed and tagged as evidentiary in nature, so it's tied to an actual crime, it's tied to an internal affairs investigation, anything else of that nature, then that particular type of incident records retention policy comes into play. Generally speaking, it's a 5-year time frame that we capture it on. And then for certain major crime types, like in the case of a homicide, that presumes everything, and we're required to keep all homicide data for 75 years. So it's based upon, again, a combination of retention schedules and things of that nature. You are right, it is a gigantic amount of data. I'm not dealing in gigabytes or terabytes. We've actually bought and are dealing things in the petabyte range and multiple petabytes. So we did some forecasting when we designed the system. I looked at things like bit rate, frames per second, the resolution of the camera. All of that determines the video file size. We then looked at an estimate based upon agencies around our area, as across the country actually, that had already had body cameras for multiple years, to get an average time frame on an 8 to 10 hour shift. How many hours were they capturing on average? We use that to formulate our calculation, and then that's how we came up with the total storage that will be for allocation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. That was a lot of information. Can you send us the I guess the procedures for the body cameras, the policy for the police department? That'll be good to have. One of our work groups are going to review that, so it'll be good to have. Is that good, Chief? You can get that to us?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go to the next question. Miss Josephine Morton.
Hi, thank you. I have a question of, after the DOJ recommendations and requirements, I understand that everything was met. However, I see that we're having these problems more frequently now, and specifically our mental health problems. Now, I understand that you had a mobile crisis team, but this mobile crisis team, I would assume, is a team that's put in place to deal with people who are having a mental issue. So when the police department is called and they know that what they're dealing with is a mental issue, is there a crisis team that's called to go out with them? Because I think this is very important. Lately, we've been losing a lot of our mentally ill citizens to to death when the police go. Now, and I understand if they got a gun, there's not too much you can do, but when they have an object, I think that we should have something in place that can deal with that object more so than having to have it deadly. So can you tell me, is there a crisis team in place for the mentally ill now? Because it looks like the DOJ required it, but it don't seem to be in place because we've not seen any at any of the shootings that have taken place. Could you answer that one for me, please? So much.
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you. Yes, so we do have the mobile crisis team. So if we get a call, somebody having an episode, mental episode, the officers are required, they call the mobile crisis team and they'll go out together. Now, there are times when officers will arrive on the scene and the person is being cooperative. And I'll give you an example. Just this week, we had an officer respond to a home in Clinton. The mother called the police and said that her son had not taken his medication. The officer gets there and he's having a conversation with this individual. The individual was calm. At that point, they learned that he was bipolar schizophrenic. Second officer showed up, and at that point, an ambulance pulled up, and they were going to get him, help get him to the hospital. He was not handcuffed. There was no reason to handcuff him. And apparently, when this individual saw the ambulance, he, got upset, didn't want to go to the hospital. And long story short, one of our officers was stabbed in the leg, behind the right knee. But they were able to successfully resolve that without resorting to force. So there are times when, it's unexpected and it happens. But when we do know that there is an issue where it can become an issue, then we'll call for the mobile crisis team. We'll make sure that we have necessary resources on hand to address the issue. And I recently received correspondence from, and forgive me, I cannot recall the name, a doctor from the health department, and wanting to know if we were interested in having teams riding together. And this was something we looked at in the past. And as you said, we're starting to notice an increase. We looked at it in the past. The number of calls that we were receiving could not justify, because throughout the department we have manpower issues. So at that time we cannot, the amount of calls cannot justify having officers broken out into those teams. So we're reviewing that now, looking at calls for service and seeing what the call volume is. But we're very sensitive to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that you're sensitive to that.
Right? Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Chief, let me just ask a follow-up to that. The mobile, the unit that you talked about,
mobile crisis team.
The mobile crisis unit, is that who is that? What's the makeup of that? What's the makeup of those professionals? Is that an officer? Is that a mental health professional?
No, they're mental health professionals.
Okay.
That will come out on the scene, meet up with our officers.
Okay.
And they'll engage.
Got it. And in this case that happened this past week, the unfortunate incident, were they called after were the mobile crisis unit called after the police arrived? They called them. Is that what happened?
So typically, yes. So if the mobile crisis team can be used, let's say there's a traffic fatality, and we make notification to the next of kin, and we see that the family is distraught, we'll call the mobile crisis team to come out, and they'll make contact with the family. We'll do a lot of referrals for a variety of reasons. In this particular case, things happened rather fast, but still mobile crisis team is contacted because now, we still have mom at home that we would like to refer so that she can get, the resources that she needs.
Chief, my last question before I turn it over to Crystal is, in your first presentation, you mentioned that there's about 300 citizens or civilians. How many civilians you have on staff at the police department? Is it 300?
I believe it's about 326.
Can we get the breakdown of what positions they hold, and and what positions they hold? And for some reason, I've heard in the past that some of those positions are social workers, and that could possibly not be true. So I just wondered what the breakdown of those were.
And it's in the PowerPoint, very beginning of the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Ms. Oriata.
Thank you. Yeah, any information around the mobile crisis unit and how they're deployed, I think would be helpful. Just because, to your point, there was another incident in Mount Rainier area where they weren't called when an older woman was barricaded in her home, obviously having an episode. Luckily, organizers and activists from our group showed up and were able, and the officers on site did not know what this mobile crisis unit was. Asante is the name of the group. They weren't really familiar with them. So I think just understanding like that process and procedure and how officers on site are aware and know that they exist would be helpful. But my question is around a few things. So one of them is there was a mention about how when there's certain critical incidences, there's a report done. And so just understanding, one, they said that there are citizens that were brought in, who selects those citizens, who decides when there needs to be a report done. So for instance, was a report done for the Leonard Sand shooting or murder, just to understand like the types of incidences that warrant a report?
It's not completed.
Okay.
So no.
So I'm sorry, I could not hear you. Can you repeat
No,
that?
I'm sorry. I did not hear the name you had said, but they told me who you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can say first with Mount Rainier, that was Mount Rainier City Police that handled that incident. They called for our support, and we extracted ourselves. We made sure that the appropriate resources were sought, but we quickly realized that there was no need for us to be there. The other thing I do want to mention is that with the mobile crisis teams, they do carry police radios and they're dispatched by police dispatchers. So with regards to the critical incidents, I think what you're talking about is the ERP, Executive Review Panel.
Mm-hmm.
And for the Executive Review Panels, we have had the outside personnel that sit on that board are the Reverend Tony Lee, Bob Ross from the NAACP, and Chris Marsh, who is a professor of sociology from the University of Maryland. And prior to 2-3 years ago, the ERPs were closed. They were an internal function. But we opened that up, and those are the three individuals that that have been and will be invited to the ERPs. So with regards to the Shand incident, the state's attorney still has that. So we have not done an ERP. We're standing by to do that. But the other thing that we're going to start doing is whenever there's a national incident, we're going to pull together an ERP, look at what's going on, and find out. And we do that with our policies. We'll pull our use of force policies. But what I want to do is formalize that, where we get everybody in a room and we're examining what occurred, why it occurred, and how does it apply to us? If it applies to us, how we can prevent something like that from happening. If we have to put out training memos, we'll put out training memos and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And is that at your discretion or whoever's the chief when you do one of those ERPs?
That is at the Inspector General runs the ERPs.
Okay. And then my second question was around, sorry, I wrote them all down. With releasing the videos, is that again also at the discretion of the chief, like when you can release videos to the public?
So that would be a case-by-case basis, depending on the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not releasing it would compromise an investigation. But this decision like that is not the chief saying, no, we're not going to do it. That's a collaborative decision between the Office of Law. There'll be a lot of communication back and forth regarding that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Miss Josephine Orney.
Yes, one last question, Chief. Thank
It's
you.
okay.
It's come to my attention, and we also had met with Chief Stawinski some years ago about a civilian being on the police review board. And I think there was actually, there was some type of legislation that was passed that a civilian is supposed to be on the police review board. So I would like to know, are you aware of that?
Yes, I am aware of that.
Okay, so will you be acting upon, will there be action upon that? Because as of today, like I said, we met with Chief Stawinski asking that this happen. This has been about 5 to 7 years ago, and today it still has not taken place. So we're concerned about that because the legislation was actually put into place to have a civilian on the police review board, but it has not been done.
And so I'll have a discussion with the County Office of Law regarding that. I do believe there was an issue with it. I'm not too sure what it is, but I'll have that discussion and I can get back to you, or the panel, I should say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that too.
Good question.
Chief, I just have a couple quick questions for you. Can you tell me what a promotional testing cycle is, and what's the purpose of it? And from my understanding, that's the department is going through one of those right now. Is that true or no?
We are going through a promotional test cycle. And so what a promotional test cycle is, and it depends on rank. If you're taking a test for the rank of PFC or corporal, the exam is given every 6 months. So that's the promotional testing cycle for those ranks. For the ranks of sergeant, lieutenant, and captain, it's every 2 years. So you have a group that'll take the exam. They'll go through the process, which is a written exam, and then an assessment center. And then the testing company will compile the scores, and they will then provide the police department with a list of the candidates, how they scored. The testing process is not handled by the police department. What we get is the list in the end. And then how we go about promoting is based on the number of vacancies that exist, based on information that's provided by OHRM. So the test list, so when that list comes out, that list expires 60 days before the next scheduled exam. And what that does is it gives the next group of individuals, because I may not be eligible to take the exam today. 2 years from now I am an eligible candidate. So with that list expiring and that new test coming up, that gives those individuals that were not qualified at that time an opportunity to compete for those ranks. And those ranks are competitive. because you can only have a certain amount of individuals at that particular rank in a unit. And I'll give you an example. In Howard County, the rank of corporal is competitive because they can only have one corporal on a squad. In Prince George's County, you can have a number of, it doesn't matter how many corporals you have in a squad. As far as the sergeants and lieutenants, you can only have a certain amount of sergeants. Let's say on the streets, you have a lieutenant running a shift, and then that lieutenant oversees 2 sergeants that are supervising squads. So that's the reason for the testing cycle is to provide officers an equal opportunity to test for promotional ranks.
Okay. Can I ask a question about, I just want to go back to, can I just go randomly? You know, I think about contracts because I know that the county, I wonder how many contracts does the police department have with companies, with exterior companies, and how many, and what percentage of those are MBE or minority businesses? For instance, you mentioned that, you know, it was a couple of times mentioned that there's some outside sources that are provided or given or that you have taken on because you don't have because of the, I guess, what you guys have, you know, because of the capacity of the department. Can you just talk about the contracts and how many minority businesses we contract with at the police department?
Yeah, I'd have to consult with Miss Angela Fair, who's the director of our fiscal affairs, and I can get that information to you.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And if anybody has any questions, just raise it in the chat so I can see if you have any. But put me on it. The last one, my other question is about the body cameras. I know we talked about it a little bit, but is it illegal to turn off your body camera while you're talking to someone? Can someone just, I didn't realize a resident can say, please don't record me. I didn't realize that was an option. Is that typical? Is that something that we do as a county?
In the state of Maryland, it is illegal to audio record someone without their consent. So if an officer walks up to me and I don't want him recording my voice, I tell him turn it off. I'm not giving you authorization.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, but I'm sorry.
No,
that's okay.
Go ahead, Ms. Morney. I woke you up back there. Go ahead.
Okay, so will we have it on the body cam where the citizen said, please do not record me?
Yes, they are required to say, yes, I'm willing to do that, but I need that on record so that, and what it does is it protects the officer and it protects that person. Absolutely. So if there is a complaint that comes in that says, well, this happened and the officer turned his body on camera, we can go back to that video and have that request.
Tacoma Park Police did not tell me that. They said, hey, you are being recorded and for your safety and mine. and didn't give me an option. Did not give me an option to say, please do not record me. So that's interesting to know. I see Mr. Turner has a comment.
I do. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I just wanted to say that with regard to the law regarding recording, audio recording, or even video recording, you can't. The law is that you can't record someone without their knowledge and consent. So if they know that you're recording them, it doesn't necessarily mean that that you don't necessarily have to have their consent, and that's particularly the case with regard to law enforcement. So there are wiretap laws that actually give the police authorization to record when they're conducting investigations. Now, with regard to the body cameras, our policy, and you asked for Delegate Washington, you asked for us to provide you with the policy, so we'll do that. But what the policy will say is that, and what the officers are directed is that first of all, they are supposed to tell someone to indicate to someone if they are recording them. If an individual says that they don't want to be recorded, that doesn't necessarily mean that the police have to turn it off. If it's in the best interest to keep the tape going, they will do so. Now, of course, there are privacy concerns, there are safety concerns. So there are a number of concerns that the police will take into consideration when making a determination whether they're going to keep the camera going. But just because someone says, don't record me, doesn't mean the police are going to turn the camera off.
And thank you for clarifying that, Donnell.
Sure.
Any more questions, Mr. Robinson? We'll take 2 more questions, Mr. Robinson.
Yeah. Thank you, Delegate. Chief, on the testing, the testing is coming up next week. What are you doing with respect to COVID? How are you implementing testing?
Well, again, testing is implemented by OHRM, but they have released the list of precautions that they're taking. They, again, making sure everyone is socially distanced, wearing masks, taking temperatures. They are also coming up with alternatives. So if someone is ill, having makeup tests. So there are a number of things, and I can get you the email that was put out earlier, listing everything that they're doing.
Okay. Also, there was the old list. Are you still using that list? There was some concerns about using the list that was not used as a result of COVID. Has that been determined? Are you still using that list?
That list expired in February, and as you know, an attorney came out and spoke out against it being expired, and that's the Office of Law. That decision still hasn't been formally finalized. So we have not been using that.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Chief, on the previous presentation, there was a from the department that said that there are LEOBR hearings that happen. How many LEOBR hearings have occurred, and how many times have citizens been a part of those LEOBR hearings? And are they a part of those hearings? Can you just describe that for us a little bit?
So the LEOBR, the trial boards are open to the public. I will have to get you the exact number that we've conducted, but we have stopped because of the COVID issue. So we actually just resumed today. Today is the first one that we've had in a while. But in terms of the numbers, I'll have to get you the numbers. But the trial boards are open to the public.
It was correct, and it was also said that. So are those on Zoom now? They're made to the public? It was also stated in law that it's has to be promoted, or the public has to be made aware. And how is the public made aware of these trial boards, or these reviews?
Yes, they are announced, and I believe it's James. How do you? I think it's placed on the website. I'll get that information for you.
Yeah, and can you just give us also the numbers of how many have had happened in the past, yes, and if they are recorded, where people can have access to these to review, to see them? If they are recorded, I think those would be good to have, good information to have. I'm gonna go to Ms. Oriata, and Mr. Ivy, I keep seeing you going in and out. Do you have a question, or if not, Ms. Oriata, go ahead. He'll answer.
Yeah, just a quick question about what are the internal policies or procedures around like consequences for officers that do not turn on their body cameras or turn them off, especially when there's been some type of complaint, specifically like a use of force complaint? Is there some type of internal policy or procedure for consequences, specifically when an officer does that?
Yes, and there is. We have what's called a discipline matrix. And when we have someone that has violated policy, we go by progressive discipline unless the act is so egregious that it requires a reduction in rank or termination. But it's I think a class 2, and I think we were looking at moving it up to 4. We're in the process of revising that because we want to make sure that somebody's going to say, well, it's only $100 fine, so I'm not worried about it. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that if they're not turning it on, that there are going to be serious repercussions for that.
Is there any way we can get that breakdown of those consequences, what you just talked about, those tiers?
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Turner, you wanted to comment on this question?
I did. I just want to echo what the chief said. So in the past, the officers who have failed to turn on their body cameras have received somewhat, I would say, light punishment. What we're looking at much more closely now at the officer's intent, especially with the rolling out of so many body cameras. So we're looking at their intent and whether if an officer, I'm not saying that there has been a case that I can identify a case at this point, but if an officer in the future, there's evidence that he or she deliberately turns off their camera or decides not to turn it on. And I think I said this last week when I spoke, we're looking at that as the equivalent of obstruction of justice or tampering with evidence. So obviously those are very serious offenses. And so those officers, will be disciplined accordingly.
And can you just make your comment about that you just publicly about the administrative hearing boards too, just so everybody knows?
Sure. Yeah. So administrative hearing boards is the administrative trial process for officers who've been accused of wrongdoing. Major McCreary talked about it some, but the chief just mentioned that we actually we just resumed trial boards today. As a matter of fact, there's a trial board that began today and it resumes tomorrow. We have a number that are scheduled in the coming weeks and months. We did stop for quite a long period of time because of COVID. We wanted to make, among other things, the county sort of shut things down, but also when we resumed the hearings, we wanted to make sure that it was safe for all the participants as well as the public who wish to attend. They are open to the public. I don't know precisely how they're advertised or how the public is made aware. I do think that it's on the county's, the police department's webpage, but we'll check that.
Can I ask just a quick question, Chief?
Sure.
How many trial
I'm sorry.
boards, you're going to get us information on trial boards for
Yes.
the previous years, right? How many do we have scheduled this year, do you know? In the future?
How many do you have scheduled this year?
Currently, we have 2 now. We're in the process of scheduling 3 more. Hoping to get more going. So we're hoping by the end of the year, we're trying to get at least 10 done by the end of the year, depending on scheduling and conflicts.
So we have 2 scheduled now. We're in the process of trying to get 3 more scheduled. We hope to have 10 done by the end of the year.
The Mr. Turner mentioned in his comments that they are not video recorded. So because the public can get to them, how will they be accessible to the public then?
They are audio recorded, but they're not video recorded, and that's something we'll probably have to look at.
Okay, thank you. And Chief, I guess my last question for you would be, when can we expect the data that we're asking for today? Because our subcommittee work groups subcommittees are going to start going into their work, and we want to use data. We want to be data-driven organization, data-driven group, and so data helps us inform our recommendations. So we have an expiration date of October 30th right now. So so we need to get that as soon as possible. When can we expect that information?
So let me say this: I am sensitive to the fact that you guys have a short turnaround. So we'll reach out to the state of Maryland. We will stress, to them that this has got to be turned over as soon as possible.
Other things like the call for service data broken down.
If you want to just speak up, I'm sorry.
I mean, Chief, if you guys can get this in the next 2 weeks, next week,
2 weeks.
We just need to know when we can get all this information. Obviously, we already asked Major McCreary about his information. That can come to us this week or next week, which would be great to have right now. So we just want as much information as we can to inform our decisions.
Sure. Yep. We can get it to 2 weeks.
Okay, great. Judge did you have any comments or anything?
I'd just like to say thank you very much. Very informative.
Thank you. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I thank you, Chief, as well for being here. Really appreciate it. And I have about 20 questions, like Delegate Fisher always says. She usually has a lot of questions and tries to send them. So I'll send those to you too. And I didn't want to ask them all, taking up a lot of time. So I'll send those over to you.
No worries.
But thank you. And then, so I'm gonna ask Ms. Sadia to hop on real quick. I know that if you can say the rules in which we can meet privately as a work group. Just
yes. Well, and I also want to call Ms. Weaver because she said she was going to be able to hop onto this call. She was in the middle of another meeting, but she wanted me to call her as soon as the presentation here was done, in case she needed to address anything specifically in terms of what we were discussing at the beginning of this call. But in terms of whenever the exceptions to the Open Meeting Act would be to have a closed session if there are several topics being discussed, some of that being active pending litigation, anything that involves legal advice that cannot be discussed, obviously, in the public. According to the meeting manual.
I think that was enough.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think that was enough. So I'm gonna move that we move into executive session so that we can have a discussion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, the ayes have it. We move into executive session to have a discussion. So Ryan, if we can not go live and also not end the meeting. Thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
And thank you as well, Chief. And thank you everyone for watching today. And we'll notify everybody when we have our next meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.